Good Tuesday to you, everybody in Com 710. Welcome to week, bam, 5. How are you doing? All right, we're past the quarter semester mark. Headed towards halfway. Everybody holding up? I hope so. All right, let's get started this week. But before we do, who do we have here? Rocky Mountain National Park. Let's see if I can get that into focus. There we go. If you ever get a chance to get into this neck of the woods, it's near Estes Park, Estes, Colorado. Beautiful. Excuse me. And if you get a chance to go there, I highly recommend the Big Meadow Ptarmigan Pass Loop Trail. Take you right up along the top of the Continental Divide. You pack a lunch and a tent and something else because it's a couple of days. But it is beautiful up there. Beautiful, beautiful. Gorgeous park, gorgeous area. All right, let's get started. Enough about me. Let's talk about you and what we're doing this week and what we're going to be doing next week. All of your presentations are in. I should say, yeah, your presentation due date has passed. If you have not turned in a presentation, you need to talk to me. Now, look, folks, I'm not trying to be a grouchy bear, but you got to get the assignments in on time. And as it plainly states in the syllabus, if you don't get them in on time, then there's no automatic expectation for full credit. Okay, yeah, I know we're crazy busy and we got things popping and coming at us all the time. I understand that. I understand. But you have to talk to me in advance. Please, you put me at a real disadvantage. In fact, you kind of put me on the spot when you don't communicate to me. You know, it isn't that ironic that in a communication program that there's not communication. Anyway, and then the stuff just comes in, or I get an email saying, "Oh yeah, I was going to tell you." Okay, I do not want you to feel badly about approaching deadlines that are busting your chops. Well, yeah, you're going to get your stuff in, but talk to me, baby. Okay, we can work through whatever the issue is, but please don't just drop stuff apropos of nothing past a due date and expect that everything's gonna be okay. Come on, all right. We're better to each other than that. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be grading them all this week. I'll have them done one by 1 week from when they came in. So they came in on the 5th. I'll have them done by the 12th. I had started grading papers for people in group 1. And I thought, this is not really fair. So this first time around, because I try to be as clear as I can in the directions to what we're looking for. But, there's always some nuances in the grading. And if people in group 2 have that information prior to doing their presentation, then that puts people in group 1 at a disadvantage. Maybe I'm overthinking this. So for this one time, I'm grading them all together. Next round, I'll grade group 1, then it comes in, then I'll grade group 2. Okay. So done by the 12th. Also during this week, I will be grading weeks 1 through 4 of the discussion board. So again, you get an idea as to what we're looking for. Okay. Now, week by week, I do follow your discussions. I sort of, check up to see how things are going. I may be in the discussion section as you're actually posting. From my end of the module, I can see the activity popping up. It seems to pop up a lot Friday night. More so than other times of the week. And you might be saying, yeah, Smarty, that's because that's when we're not working our jobs. Yeah, I get it. But I'm just saying that there are a lot of posts that come in, towards the deadline. Okay, I get that. And then I read through them all week by week. In general, my philosophy is to sort of stay out of your way. You'll only hear me chime in if someone's not being real nice. I'll typically reach out to them privately and say, hey, dial it down a little bit. Otherwise, I let you do your thing. And I have to tell you, the discussions this week or this semester have been great. All right. So what you'll see in the grading is I'm fairly liberal with awarding points. If you're responding in a meaningful way, that rises above, oh, hey, Bob, great point. And then, on you, it's like, yeah, come on. Okay. I'll give you credit for the post. All right. So watch for the grading of not only the presentation, but the first 4 weeks of the discussion board. And if you have any questions about why something was evaluated and graded the way it was, please reach out to me. I'm here to help. Okay. I want to tell you or mention to you a little bit about some of the material assigned for this week, and then we're going to get to last week. One of the things that I put in there by way of material, I mean, they're the pages that I'm asking you to read. All right, but there's also a portion of a documentary, a BBC documentary, an excellent documentary called "The Century of the Self." And this particular portion of the documentary focuses on the development and the rise and the widespread use of marketing and PR, and let's just call it what it is, propaganda. And some of the central figures, Walter Lippmann is in there, Edward Bernays is in there, Jacob Gallup is in there. These thinkers, not quite sure what to call them, because there is more than a fair bit of unethical behavior among these guys. But they hammer out what becomes the template for public relations and public manipulation that is now used globally. So if you're watching this, and it runs a bit, it's almost 4 hours, like 3 hours and 54 minutes. If you're watching this and you go, whoa, oh my gosh, that sounds a lot like Communist Party China. That's because it is, all right? Because other powers around the world adopted these techniques developed by people like Bernays, who was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. All right, so if it looks familiar, or maybe you'll even see it in what you find here in the United States. I don't know. It is. So it runs a bit, but I have a feeling it's going to be worth your time. All right, you'll enjoy watching this portion of the documentary. Okay, finally, your first, part one of your paper is due on February 20th. That's just a little under 2 weeks. Remember, no draft work. It really makes it hard for me to evaluate your research methodology, your writing, organizational, skills. And again, we're doing this all to help you grow as communicators when things are in draft form. It's not that I have any objections to drafts. I mean, I use them and make them a lot. I'm trying to remember what this thing is called. I have one of these writable, tablets that works with like a stylus like this, and I'm constantly writing drafts of things down myself. I mean, I write for a national newspaper, so I'm always having to pitch ideas. I like this thing because then I can send it to my desktop, and it appears as a document that I can work in and continue to type. Which reminds me, for part one, and this is in the directions, please upload your paper in PDF form, because I can use this, and I do, to grade your papers. Why this as opposed to, say, just doing it Blackboard? Any opportunity that I can seize on that gets me out of this chair and from behind these keys, I take it. Someone who teaches communication, works as a professional writer. I spent a lot of time in front of the keys. Sometimes I don't know how I ended up like this. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love writing, but I'm very kinetic, a very active person by nature. I do and feel much better being up and moving around, and especially outside, which doesn't go well with sitting at a desk. So any means by which I can go somewhere else and do the work I need to do, I take it. So some of you may receive back a PDF. You upload a PDF. I'll grade the PDF and I'll make comments by writing on it with the stylus and then send it back to you. And if you have any problem reading my handwriting, which some have described as creative, please to ask me, okay? Because remember, we are here to help. All righty, let's take a look at the readings from last week, the questions, and what you said, and see if we can flesh that out, okay? So, question number one, I gave you an option. So, have you ever read one of those choose your own story books, where you get to a certain part in the story and says, if you want to go in the cave and seek out the treasure, go to page 23. If you decide to turn back and call it a day, go to page 94. Like those sorts of things. And I used to love those books. All right, question number one was like that. Okay, so we asked in his chapter, how could so much produce so little? Foreign affairs reporting in the wake of 9/11. Fahmy, the author, began by writing, scholars have repeatedly criticized American news media for reporting foreign news in less complex manner and for oversimplifying and decontextualizing international news events. And then he, uses, or the author, uses the example of the Tiananmen Square photo of the guy standing in front of the tank, so-called tank man, to make the point. Okay, so I asked you to consider the statement and then choose one of the following paths. If you agree with the author, finish the chapter and use one outside source to support your agreement. Okay, and I sent you a link. The link that I sent you was not meant to say you have to use this outside source, but it was to sort of give you a framework with which to choose and judge outside sources. If you disagree, I asked you to finish reading the chapter, find one outside source to support your disagreement, and then I said, maybe a way to help you sort of get your head around this is take a look at the article by Roland Barthes, the great French author, on the rhetoric of the image. All right, and your responses were surprising to me, that no one outright disagreed with the author. I found that very interesting. And so most of you agreed with the author, and some of you were like, yeah, I could see it this way, I could see it the other way. But nobody flat out said, no, that's not true. But let's take a look at some of you, what some of you said then. Brenda, you said that Fahmy argues the U.S. media hardly covers much international news, and when they do, they fail to meaningfully interpret foreign news for the American people. Local media set agendas for what their audiences will consume. And I fully agree with the argument that news consumers have an increasing demand on their time, so they must prioritize information. And local news is generally held to be more important than foreign news, which is true. And in many ways, and this is not unique to the United States, by the way. I've worked and traveled and spent time, living and passing through and spending, short bursts of time in, I don't know what now, like 27 countries. And, to a greater or lesser degree, this is a commonality across borders. Okay. And then, Brenda, you mentioned, so the complexity of the Rwandan genocide was framed as a localized ethnic conflict between Hutus and Tutsis, which made the killings be a localized problem, not a complex, not a complex conflict perpetrated by French and Belgian colonials. When the massacre intensified, leading to hundreds of thousands killed and more displaced, and deplorable conditions in refugee camps, the U.S. media started ramping up news using humanitarian crisis framing with increased views of cholera outbreak. In one instance, the U.S. administration instructed government spokesmen not to use the word genocide, instead focus on providing support to Rwanda affected by the cholera outbreak. Yan, and then you cite the author, blames this kind of bias. This bias oversimplistic coverage is due to a lack of contact, even through physical presence, does not guarantee fully understanding the context. Okay, I think I know what you mean there. But I like that you mentioned Rwanda because, now remember what our job is as communication scholars. We're investigators, not advocators. While we're working with our, got the Regent merch here, with our scholarly hats on, it's our job to analyze, not necessarily to criticize. And that you don't do the one while doing the other doesn't mean that you approve of what's going on. All right. There's a misconception broadly, socially, that unless I'm screaming and pumping my fist and shouting down something, then I'm okay with it. All right. That's not how what we're doing works. Okay. So back to, I'm glad that you mentioned the Rwandan genocide. Yeah, people have a limited bandwidth with which to understand especially foreign news. They may have no idea of the region. I mean, even where it is geographically. Give them a map and say, show me Rwanda. You know, and I wonder, I mean, this, you see this sort of on late night television shows where they stop people on the street and say, you know, can you tell us what the capital is of, you know, of the United States? And they go, oh, Bolivia or something. Okay. Outside of that, many people that you would ask might not even be able to identify the correct continent, let alone the country. So there's a limited bandwidth that people have when it comes to understanding information. And as a consequence, it shouldn't be terribly surprising that then for media to try to connect. Because remember, what the media's job, sorry to burst everybody's bubble, but their primary job is not to inform and enrich you. Their primary job is to make money and stay in business. Now, you know, like say a Whole Foods company, they may design to do the one, inform and enrich you, as a means to the other, making money. All right, but the bottom one, the bottom line, the making money, always going to take priority. Okay, but anyway, so for those of you interested in you know what happened in Rwanda, let me recommend a book to you. All right. This is an area of the continent of Africa I've spent a fair bit of time in, that is in and around Rwanda, in the central towards the southern part of the continent. So it is a dynamic part of the world. Very, very interesting. All right. And so if you want to know more, and again, Brenda, thank you for sort of, you know, pointing this out. Let me recommend this book called Dancing in the Glory of Monsters. It is probably the most extensive history that I have seen that tackles the Great War of the Congo and how that conflict sucked in and embroiled and turned loose other conflicts like the one in Rwanda. You know, most people don't know. They have no idea that throughout the 1990s, there was a massive war in the central part of this continent where millions and millions were killed. I mean, numbers that, you know, rise to like First and Second World War levels. Most people are like, oh, what? Okay. Limited bandwidth. But if you want to know more about that, excellent, excellent book. Okay. Alan, or Sean, excuse me. Let's see what you had to say. When we consider the position of the author, I actually stand on both sides. This is one of the, you know, you really can't stand on both sides. You can say, I can see both perspectives. The statement in the U.S. media presents an oversimplification, decontextualized view of a larger student demonstration that is in China is true. The reason I partially agree with both sides is that most countries are guilty of presenting inaccurate representation of news. For some countries, news is even suppressed so that it is not seen. Good point. You know, there's oversimplification for the purpose of trying to connect with what is a narrow bandwidth of the viewer. And look, as an author, as a writer for a national paper, I get this all the time. You know, these notes from my editor on the side of my manuscript. It's too complicated. No one's going to understand this. Make this simple, you know, simplify this. Okay, give me a second. So yeah, excellent point, Sean. Okay, question number 2. In the chapter News as Culture, Comparative Study of Newspaper Coverage of the War in Iraq, Ghanem writes about using frames or framing in the news. Okay, so first I asked you to define framing. What does that mean in relationship to the news? Because we're not talking about picture frames. And then second, I asked you to select 2 of the following news sources that coverage the 75th anniversary of the liberation, I don't know what's going on with me today, of the work/death camp Auschwitz. Okay. And I asked you how each of them framed the story. So you had a choice between Al Jazeera, which is located in Qatar, and then Haaretz, which is located in Israel, and Sky News, which is located in Britain. Same event, very different frame. Billy, let's see what you said. Framing is the way in which news is presented to the audience. For example, an event that takes place on American soil, such as mass shootings, will be presented to citizens differently, say, in European news, or even, depending on locally where you're reading it. Okay, so you say Sky News Britain framed the news as a devastating event that took place during World War II, claiming the lives of millions of Jews, kids, babies, and adults of all ages. Clip focused on a 93-year-old survivor who still have problems sleeping and living with his day-to-day life as the trauma is so paralyzing. Okay, true. And you say, and this was the victim frame. Okay, excellent summation in those little parenthetical notes. Haaretz Israel framed the event as a completely different direction, calling into question the event's accuracy and accusing the Jews of using events to get a leg up, claiming millions of separators. Okay, I think actually this was more Al Jazeera. This was not Haaretz. Okay, so you got the right idea. You got the wrong news coverage story, because the one from Israel was about the visit of Macron and how he has this tussle with the guards. Okay. I'm sorry. That is Al Jazeera. Okay. All right. But I don't think that what they were up to in Haaretz was, how to get a leg up. Rather, it was the focus on the suspension of the journalist from Al Jazeera. And the frame is, those people are always framing the Holocaust as something that didn't happen. And here's one of them. Okay. All right. Okay, now bear in mind that when you talk about frames and framing, that framing in the media is both, and it usually happens at the same time, right? At least one of these two is both the media outlet telling the viewer not only what to think about, like this is the story, like look at this event over here. We're not even going to mention that over there, but also what to think about it. Right. Well, this is what it means. We're not going to cover this event at all. We're going to cover this event, and this is what it means to you. Right. So watch for both of those behaviors in framing. Okay. Question number 3. In January 2022, several news outlets reported that, quote, 270 doctors had written an open letter. And I gave you a link in the Denver Gazette, which took it off of the Associated Press. So this wasn't something that the Denver Gazette was covering locally in Denver. This was a national story. All right. But I used this link and the Denver Gazette because this is one of the freebies. I mean, it was in the New York Times, but unless you have a paid subscription to the New York Times or the Washington Post, then I don't expect you to give the Washington Post or the New York Times your money. That's why I use the Denver Gazette. All right. Somebody wrote me, said, Denver Gazette, what's that? That's the rhyme and the reason, okay? That these 270 doctors asked Spotify to remove Joe Rogan's podcast from their streaming service. The 270 doctors story noted claim that Joe Rogan, a sportscaster and podcaster, had made false, misleading statements concerning vaccinations of and treatment for COVID-19. And so I gave you the story. And then I said, take a look at the treatment of the story, that is the 270 doctors, by the infotainer Russell Brand. And I gave you the link to his podcast. And the question is, was Joe Rogan framed? Yeah, play on words, I know. Which of the frames, say, compare the story in the Denver Gazette to the coverage by Russell Brand, was most honest, that is closest to the story's facts? Okay, Lauren, let's see what you said. Oh, wow. I had no idea about this information from the Joe Rogan podcast. I remember the backlash from some of his comments and remember vaguely hearing about the letter, but certainly had no idea the majority of the 270 doctors who signed the letter were not even doctors or were not qualified to practice medicine, which was true. Initially, when you read the Denver Gazette article, you think of it as a news frame. This is breaking news that is being covered and reported to inform the audience. Then, however, you get to more information about the breakdown of the doctors who signed the letter, and you get to Brand's point that this was more about power than information, with the actual objective is what we want, who we want to be in charge again. That's Russell Brand. As such, I think you could argue the motivation then for the coverage is more in line with a deep frame as it's addressing the cultural issues and perhaps even shifts in power. Okay. So yes, Lauren, you're right. You know how the Denver Gazette framed this was, the doctors disagree, and so don't listen to Joe Rogan. How Russell Brand framed this was, it's not about the Denver Gazette as a media outlet trying to ensure good public health by telling people don't listen to Joe Rogan, but rather it was about a struggle for power. That is, who is the source from which people get their information? Joe Rogan, or and whatever people say mainstream media. I don't know how well that term applies. Legacy media, established media, print media, something else. I want some other rubric that is not in and of itself derogatory. Okay, is it about power? Well, that's a frame. See, I have my opinions on this, but that's my opinion in this context of the discussion of your material is not what I want you to get. I want you to get the material and then do the evaluation yourself. All right. So clearly, Russell Brand has a frame. It's about power. Now, you could say, from an analytical perspective, Russell Brand is himself challenging the media power structure. I mean, he doesn't have a news channel. He has a podcast and a YouTube, and I think he's over on Rumble as well. All right, so he's a single individual. He doesn't have a sports desk, and so, who therefore is challenging established media power. You might say, might that lead him to frame the story? And here's the interesting bit when you start getting down into frames and those that create them. Where's the line between something that they're doing intentionally to present the story to you in a way that they think will push your confirmation bias button, or on the other side, they really believe this? This is what they really think. Russell Brand really believes this is a struggle for power over the control of the flow of information. All right. Now, whatever is going on there, there's clearly a frame. Okay. Okay. But Lauren, I think you did a good job in summing up the two, but the question was, which is closest to the facts? All right, so let's take a look at Mimi. Was Joe Rogan framed? A group of 70 doctors, you go, in my opinion, when someone has performed as successfully as Joe Rogan had, needs to be responsible for what content he puts out, although Joe Rogan's podcast is known to be controversial. Some people are weak-minded and stand behind those that have a huge platform. My conclusion, the article in the Denver Gazette is closest to the facts. Okay, first of all, kudos points for answering the question, who's closest. But you raise another interesting point here, Mimi, and that is the central question where frames and framing are concerned. Perhaps the central issue isn't the way to put it, which is central to what we do in communication and PR. And that is, can people be trusted to make up their own minds? Okay. Now, this is going to be one of the rare instances in which you hear what I think, when I'm going to tell you what I think, because I would encourage all of you as developing communication professionals to embrace the answer of yes, people must be trusted to make up their own minds. Why is that? Why do I encourage you to embrace the answer of yes to this proposition? Our system, our governmental and social system, depends absolutely on almost an unspoken faith in one another, a faith that each individual has the capacity to govern his or herself, can be a morally autonomous entity without government oversight. If you take that assumption away, that is, we just don't believe it anymore, that pulls the rug out from underneath the concept like free speech, right to property. I mean, you can have stuff, but you don't know what to do with it. So you need something else telling you what's the correct use for your property or your money or your words. That approach does not go with the fundamental principles of our founding. And just like physical structures, social structures do not withstand tension in perpetuity. And what I mean by that is if you have no structure exists always in a non-state of equilibrium. So if you have a building, I'm just going to use this book as an example, and it's tilting to one side. Let's say the bell tower in Pisa. I've been there. By the time we got there, it was so out of whack you couldn't climb anymore. Very interesting. All right, so let's say that you have a building that's leaning, that's out of equilibrium. All right, unless you do something to correct that, it's going to fall over. It will find a new equilibrium, and that word equilibrium does not mean good. It just means that tension has been released. Social structures do not exist in perpetuity and tension. They cannot. So if you have a fundamental principle on the one hand, that you all have a right, we all have a right, a God-given right to these certain freedoms. But then on the other hand, but I just can't trust my neighbor. Those two don't go well together. That's why I recommend, and I don't mean just like, send because Dr. Gardner says so. No. Spend some time wrapping your head around why you should embrace the proposition of yes. Yes, people have the capacity to think for themselves, and we must trust that they do. All right, question number 4. Enough of my pontification. In their chapter, Blogs as Stealth Descent, Za and Permuter, right? Here we consider 2 paradoxes of modern global media. What are the paradoxes? I asked you to explain them. Okay, Marquette did a good job on this one. Let's hit you. 2 paradoxes can be broken down into first, in an age when all online communication is accessible to international audiences, even if produced for local consumption, how do we read across borders, cultures, and symbolic systems? Excellent, because there are nuances within a culture that if you're not in that culture, you're not going to get. All right. If you have a Chinese blog that talks about, pets, cats, as a means by which to criticize the government, and this is outside of your cultural frame, right past you. You're never going to get it. Secondly, you write, how can a local communicator produce oppositional communication within the restrictive society that, in theory and legal fact, controls the information its citizens can gather, disseminate, and exhibit? Excellent point. I'll give you a quick story, and we'll wrap things up to illustrate that point. One of the places that I worked was Turkey, and I've been to the capital, Istanbul, a number of times. It's a fascinating city, beautiful city. Well, the first time I was there, I was out and about, and it's the Bosphorus Straits. It's where Eurasia meets Asia. All right, and into the Black Sea. And if you go down and you're on the Eurasia side, you go down to the Bosphorus Straits. The boats that go out into the Black Sea that go fishing, they come in the evening, and they have, it's this wondrous thing. They go out and catch these fish, and then right on the boat, on these fishing boats, they have like these big grills, these big griddles set up, and they're cooking the fish fresh, straight out of the water. And they just sort of bob up and down there next to the dock, and you can step up and order a wonderful meal. They traditionally serve these fish fillets, fried crispy on a large sort of a roll with onions and lettuce, and then maybe a little salt and all that. Delicious. So I'm down at the Bosphorus Straits. There's a bridge that goes over there called the Galata Bridge. I'm down by the Galata Bridge. All right. And I'm working there. I'm reporting on a story, but I got some time off. And I'm sitting there minding my own business, eating my fish sandwich. And up walks this guy, a local, and he can tell I'm American. I got all this camera gear that I'm hauling around anyway. And he introduces himself. And we start to talk. And he says, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a writer. I'm here as a reporter. And I say, what do you do? And he says, I'm a seashell salesman. And I say, oh, okay. Pleased to meet you. My name's Jeff Gardner. And he gives me his card, and his name is Sammy. And I said, wait a minute. You're Sammy who sells seashells by the seashore? And he's like, yeah. And of course, culturally, he doesn't get it. I'm like, okay. He said, have you seen my beautiful city? And I said, well, yeah, I've looked around a little bit. He said, no. You haven't seen it until someone who lives here shows it to you. Can I give you a tour? I thought, sure, let's go. So we tromped all over that city. I had a wonderful time. Beautiful. Very, very nice guy. And we ended near the Blue Mosque, which is not far from the church built under the reign of Justinian the Emperor, Hagia Sophia. And there's a cafe in between the Church of Hagia Sophia, of the Church to Wisdom, Sophia, and the Blue Mosque. All right, there's a cafe in between those two called the Dervish Cafe. And it was getting late. We went into the Dervish Cafe to have some Turkish coffee, and it just started raining. It was just pouring. And while we were sitting there with the pouring rain, sitting out under the awnings, the call to prayer began from the mosque. And it just booms across the city. In fact, I'll put a link to a little YouTube video that somebody took. It wasn't me, who was there at the Blue Mosque during the call to prayer. And now I want to be very clear. I'm not pitching Islam here, okay? I am an unapologetic, except for when it comes to arguing the faith. That is, that's the practice of apologetics. Christian, but I'm sitting there listening to this, and this call to prayer from the Mezzayin, the person calling out, and all Islamic prayer begins with the phrase, God is great. Allahu Akbar. God is great. Is booming out through the city, but it's almost cutting through you. And as a communication modality, I had, you have to admit, it's impressive. And we're sitting there listening to that, and Sammy looks over at me and he goes, "Isn't that beautiful?" Now, he's a Muslim. And I said, yeah, I'll grant you that's impressive, but I said, for me as an American, when I hear that, and this was in the early 2000s when the Iraq War was in full swing. I said, when I hear that, what I think of, he said, when you hear that, don't you think of the beauty of man's capacity to create art as given to him by God? That is the melodic nature of the call. I said, actually, I got to tell you, when I hear that, I think about all my American compatriots who served my country that have been shot and blown to bits by insurgents, and then after they kill them, they shout out Allahu Akbar. And Sammy just stopped. I mean, I can remember he was taking a drink of his coffee and almost like spat it out. And he said, What do you mean? Who would do such a horrible thing as to use those words, God is great, after killing someone? He said, I can't believe such a thing. And I was, as taken aback by what he said as he was by what I said. I said, what do you mean? What do I mean? It's all over the internet, man. You cannot help but find it. And he said, where do you see these things? And I said, just pull it up. I said, but, and I didn't want to ruin the evening. We'd had an enjoyable time. I said, but, yeah, there's a beauty to it. I'll acknowledge that. Well, I went back to my hotel room and, I signed on to the internet and I thought, I'm not trying to bust this guy's chops, but maybe I'll send him a link. And I tried to pull up some of those videos and I couldn't. In fact, I couldn't even find them because what I didn't realize at the time while I was there, that I found out once I got back to the States and did a little bit of work, is that all the internet that comes into the country, to the Republic of Turkey, is filtered by a state-run service. And people who live there, they don't see that stuff. So from their perspective, it doesn't exist. There are no crazies running around blowing up American servicemen and women and then crying, God is great. And I thought, okay. Matter of perspective, a matter of frame. And then I understood where he was coming from. So this is the paradox. This is the paradox, and it's real. It's real. Okay, everybody, that's the end of my story. I'll tell you what I'll do. In the announcement section, I will post a link to the book that I mentioned, and I'll post a link to that video so you can hear, the audio of what I was talking about. All right. Continue to work on those part ones. Watch for your discussion board grade and your first presentation grade. Have a great, great week. All right. Remember that I think about you often. I pray for you often, and I will see you on Blackboard. Okay. God bless. Bye-bye.